Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar today. So Micah, the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, is presenting this webinar this afternoon, which is going over the 2019 annual report, an overview of the data. So hopefully that's the topic that you signed up for. Just a few things to begin with. We are recording this webinar, so just be aware of that, and we will be posting it on our website after. There are handouts in GoToWebinar that you can download at this time if you would like, one of which is the actual report, and then the other one is the presentation that you'll be viewing today. Those will also be sent out to you after the presentation if you have any issues downloading them right now. We are requesting that all questions are typed into the chat, so you should see kind of at the bottom of your GoToWebinar place where you can open it up to chat, and that's where we would like questions. We'll try to answer them as soon as we can. Some, if they're maybe not as specific, we might hold till the end of the webinar, but someone will respond about each question. And, all right, so I'm Allison Green, the manager of partner training, support, and engagement. We have with us Gary Leslie, who will be speaking to us today, who's the HMIS project director, as well as Laurel Birchfield, who's our associate director, is in the background making the magic happen. So with that, I will give it off to you, Jerry.
Well, thank you very much, Allison, and we are excited to have you all here. This is the first webinar to introduce the data from the Michigan's annual 2019 homeless report in the state of Michigan, and we are very excited to unveil this to you. Of course, it is available in the handout section, but we also want to encourage you just to have in your toolkit, if you can, or bookmarks in your web browser, just remember that www.michigan.gov/MCTEH, or the Michigan Campaign to End Homelessness, the initials. That is the website where the Campaign to End Homelessness is hosted. That is always a place where if you want to go and encourage other people to download copies of reports or see additional messages, including we have a message from our Lieutenant Governor, Garland Gilchrist, about homelessness in Michigan, it is really the key place to start whenever you want to look at evaluation and some of the key initiatives that are going on in the state of Michigan. So we do want to put a plug in for the Campaign to End Homelessness website because of being such a great resource that it is. So why do we do the annual report in the state of Michigan? Well, first of all, what it does is when we say it grounds the HMIs in reality, what that means is if you take data and you dump data into a big black hole and never do anything with it, that data is really not useful. The time we spend collecting it, I should really say the time you all spend collecting it in local communities and doing all the hard work on it, if that data is not being used to improve the lives of people who are experiencing homelessness, to resolve homelessness quicker, and to keep people out of homelessness, then there really is no purpose for collecting that data. The idea behind the annual report is it is a way for us to report out as to how effective we all are being in our efforts to prevent and end homelessness across the state of Michigan. And part of that means that it supports the management of resources. As you all know, we have a very limited number of resources, and many of you know that sometimes those resources can go very quickly. And so it's really critical to make sure that with the limited amount of resources that we have, that there's an equitability in the distribution of those resources. And part of the work around the annual report is it helps us determine what are the needs where and how those resources can be distributed. It also supports process improvement. So the idea of, we call something called, of course, system performance measures is HUD's term. We in Michigan for a long time have used the term continuous quality improvement, which basically means we're continuing to look for strategies that we can use to improve the outcomes of people who are connecting with our service delivery system for the purpose of receiving those resources. We want to see people be successful in getting out of homelessness. We want to see them not return to homelessness. We want to be able to do things like eliminate or reduce food insecurity, increase income, all key elements that we need to do to make sure that homelessness is, of course, rare, brief, and non-recurring. And also, again, data is only useful to the degree it's being used. So if we don't use this data, it's not going to really benefit us in the work we're doing in the state of Michigan. Go
Okay,
ahead, Allison. Oh, go ahead.
before we move on, I have some poll questions to just see where folks are at that I'm going to do real quick.
Absolutely.
So the first one, hopefully you're seeing up on the screen now, and it's asking you if you've had a chance to read this year's annual report. So if you could please select. Okay, it looks like almost everyone responded. So, sorry, how do I show the response?
Yeah, hit the close poll. And once
Okay,
you hit the close poll, then you hit the show responses and you should be good. There we go.
so it looks like 64% of you, it's on your to read pile. 27% caught the highlights, and 9% said, of course. And luckily, 0% asked, what is the annual report?
That
So
is a good side right there that you all know what it is.
the next question is going to be, over the last 12 months, my organization, my COC or LPB, has shared the homelessness data with, and then we have some options there that you can choose. I'm assuming as many as are applicable. Okay, I'll give it a couple more seconds. Looks like half of you have voted, so if everyone else wants to get on in. Okay, so it looks like 38% of you shared it with policymakers, 38% shared it with media, 48% shared it with funders, 48% the general public, and 33% with others.
Now, let me just jump in for a quick second, Allison. And so some of you are going to know this because you've been doing this for years, but for those of you who may not, every year in the spring or early summer, we send out, so obviously the annual report goes out, but we also send out to your local planning bodies or your local COCs, basically the key breakdown of the same data that we use in this report for your own local community. So if you're not aware of it, just know that we share that local data with you about what's happening to end homelessness in your local community. And please feel free to use that data in addition to the statewide report to inform stakeholders of what is happening within your world to end homelessness.
Thank you. We have two more questions just for it's not. There we go. Okay, what other data sources do you use in your agency, COC, or LPB? So again, choose whatever options are applicable to you and your community.
Hi, everyone. This is Laurel. I messed up with this question again and forgot to make this one where you could select as many as you wanted. So just chiming in to apologize. I guess pick the one that you use the most. Jerry and Allison are going to take away my question creating responsibilities moving forward.
I made the same mistake, Laurel, so don't feel bad.
Okay, well, we're holding strong at 60% of the folks voting. So 17% of you said the United Way Alice reports, 6% the Kids Count report, 17% census data, 33% Pitt and Hick, and 28% is other. And then our last question is, does your COC or LPB reference the annual report when planning for the year ahead? Okay, I'll give it a couple more seconds. All right, it looks like 39% of you, your COC or LPP does use the report, 22% don't, and 39% of you are not sure. So thank you for participating. That gives us a good idea of the differences on the call here today. So back to you, Jerry.
And just really briefly, I did see a question pop in from Michelle asking if the numbers are going to be available on a countywide basis. So the answer to that question is, here's the thing about that is we do release that on a local planning body basis. However, quote unquote, if your local planning body is a combination of two different counties and you only are collecting data within one provider page within HMIS, at that situation, it's not possible for us to separate out that data per se and be able to split that out with the reporting structure we have. So really just again, when we release it, it's going to be largely based upon what the local planning body structure of your quote unquote, your local planning body in the HMIS is going to dictate whether or not we can release that in a county by county basis, or it's going to be a multi-county release. So the question that we're going to answer is, where do these numbers come from? So this is a brief description of how we approach this. So first question we often get, and I will say Laurel and Allison, jump in if I am wrong on this, but we are going to be releasing a series of documents about the PIT count versus the annual count and how to understand that. And that is coming. But just to, well, go ahead, Allison.
No, I was just going to chime in and say our goal is to get that out today or tomorrow.
Perfect. So keep your eyes out for that. Good. But what is the difference between it? So simply put, think about it this way. The difference between the annual count and the PIT count is the PIT count counts the number of people who experience homelessness on one specific night of the year. And we do that for the last Wednesday in January. The annual count looks at the total number of people who are homeless during the entire calendar year of the year we're measuring. So in this case, it is 2019. Now, the annual report also does something really awesome because HMIS permits us to do that, and that it deduplicates. So if a person is homeless through the year, they have multiple episodes of homelessness or cross back and forth between multiple COCs, we're able to unduplicate that person, and that person only is counted as being one person who's experienced homelessness. So what we do is specifically, we look at the total number of people who are in HMIS who experience homelessness, who are category 1. That's the other thing to remember. This is going to be people who are category 1, which is people not living in places fit, or people living in places not fit for human habitation, or living in emergency shelter or transitional housing for people experiencing homelessness. So 55,000 and change were in HMIS. And what we use is we use a coverage ratio or a formula to calculate, based upon HMIS participation rates, what the remaining number of people are estimated to be that may not get into HMIS, but who experience homelessness during the year. Go ahead into the next slide, Allison. And so this is a look at the homeless data regionally across the state. So one thing I do want to say, and this is this chart is often something people don't understand, and it's easy to misunderstand it. But when you look at the numbers in the chart and you see the percentage on the chart, what the percentage is not an increase or decrease, but it's actually what the percentage of the number of people who are literally homeless within that region as a percentage of the overall or whole number of persons who are experiencing homelessness across the state. So if we take a look at region number 4, which is the West Michigan region, including Muskegon, Grand Rapids, Ottawa, that area, they are 25% of the total number of people who are experiencing homelessness in the state of Michigan. Then region 10, which of course is Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne County, is going to be 26% of the state total. So that's how you would read that. Then if you look at the very bottom, it will have up arrows or down arrows below the regional numbers, where you'll see the total count of people who are experiencing homelessness across the last 3 years. And the up arrows and down arrows will show you the percent change of the number of people who are homeless in those areas, the regions across the last 3 years. One thing just to note too is if you are in a region with a very small population, or region where service delivery changes quite drastically, you may see, like for instance, you'll see numbers in region 1 typically go up and down a little bit more drastically. And sometimes that can be percentage-wise based upon how services are delivered, what resources are available up there, and also just what is your capacity to serve people who are experiencing homelessness. If you typically are in an area that may be a little more urban, areas where you have more established service delivery patterns and resources are a little stronger, those numbers don't necessarily, or they're not affected quite in the same way based upon resourcing that they would be in an extremely rural area. Okay, next slide. Now this is one that I do want to also have Laurel make some remarks on too, because this is one of the biggest areas of importance to us in 2019 and in 2020 moving forward. We're really beginning to dive in pretty deep to understand how racial disparities and how issues of equity affect those who are experiencing homelessness across the state of Michigan. And so one thing that we really want to stress is if you look at our population in the state of Michigan, we see that 14% of the population is Black or African American. But if you are to look at the number of persons who are literally homeless during the year, what we find out is 52% of the people who are homeless in the state of Michigan are going to be Black. So based on that, we know very clearly that homelessness tends to disproportionately affect obviously people of color, particularly people who identify as being Black. Those numbers are quite a significant jump above what the statewide population looks like. And one thing we will talk about in a slide following this, but it is very important to recognize, is the more acute or the longer duration, if you will, an episode of homelessness is, or the more significant an episode of homelessness is, the more that racial disparity comes into play. We know that people who experience chronic homelessness run about 57% of them are going to be Black. So as you get more significant episodes of homelessness, more significant incidents of it, that racial disparity continues to expand. Laurel, anything you want to add to, because I know we're doing a lot of initiatives with the state partners to deal with racial equity, and just want to kind of maybe a little bit touch on that. We'll be touching on some of that more in a webinar to come.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry, for allowing me to chime in. I think the only other thing I'd like to acknowledge is that in the development of this report, the writing team made a conscious decision to really focus on these disparities. And so you'll find throughout the report that we've stepped away from simply introducing data and allowing the reader to interpret that. into a space where we are trying to provide additional context. And so on this page specifically, we do talk about the historical systemic racism that has led to these disparities. And we will discuss this in a future webinar that is going to be in 2 weeks. We do have registration information for that in the presentation, and you can access that through the handout. And in that webinar, we'll talk about how you can use this as a framework for your advocacy and your communications when talking about racial disparities. But I encourage you to look at the report now and see how every single page of this report touches on the disparities found within this population and gives you more information about how you can talk about it as we move towards solutions. So thank you, Jerry.
Very good. And one thing you're not going to see in this report, but I really feel it's important to mention it, is this is significant, obviously, in our urban areas where we have a higher percentage of Black population. But the reality of it is when you look at the data statewide, we have racial disparities. It doesn't matter if it's an urban area or if it's a rural area. In our rural communities, there are racial disparities across the state of Michigan, and those higher percentages of people who, even though the percentage of people who are identifying as Black in those communities may be much lower than in other parts of the state, we are still seeing the degrees of racial disparity exist within the people who are experiencing homelessness in rural areas. So it isn't just uniquely an urban or suburban problem. It is a rural problem. It's something we see across the state of Michigan. And one more to add to that also is just knowing that in some communities where there's a significant Native American population, it obviously is very similar with a Native American population. We see some of the same trends reflected. So we're going to talk about health disparities. This is another one of the key areas that we really focus on, and this is really coming to the disability breakdown. So for those of you familiar with HMIS, this is going to be in that disability sub-assessment where you put in information. What we have found out is by looking at the data in the system, we have 56% of people who are experiencing literal homelessness. They do and they do not have a disability. However, 44% of those in the state of Michigan with who are experiencing homelessness do have a form of disability. On the right-hand side, this is going to be a breakdown of the of that 44%. What are the most prominent disabilities that we see within the population? 66% or 2/3 are people with a mental health condition. 43% of those are going to be persons with a physical health condition. 26 will have a substance use disorder, whether that be alcohol or other substances. 25% will be a chronic health condition, and 15% will be a developmental disability. Now, one thing that is, for all you mathematicians out there, statisticians, you're going to notice these percentages do not add up to 100 because it is possible for somebody to have multiple conditions at the same time. So, for instance, it is possible for somebody to have a mental health condition and a substance use disorder, or it is possible for someone to have a physical health condition and a developmental disability. Also, one of the things that we are really encouraged by, and this is really a good thing that we're seeing in Michigan, is within the range of people that we're talking about here out of the homeless population, which is 100%, you look down at that circle graph below, we find that 83% of people in Michigan who experience the homelessness have health insurance that they maintain, whereas 75% or nearly 3 out of 4 people in the state of Michigan utilize Medicaid resources. So many of you remember several years ago when we were going through the Medicaid expansion process, and the legislature and the governor's office worked to ensure we had that Medicaid expansion. This is where we're seeing the fruits of that, in that 3 out of 4 people in the state of Michigan who are experiencing homelessness do have at least Medicaid with the additional about 8% with other forms of health insurance. So it means that we still have work to do. There's still 17% of people in the state of Michigan who are experiencing homelessness without health insurance, but this is really pointing to the fact that there has been some good work done in that area to get people access to health insurance. Now, this is going to be a specific focus area that we put a lot of energy into the last few years, as many of you know. and that senior homelessness statistically is a growing population. So those over the age of 55, this area continues to grow. And we know based on actuarial tables that are national and average life expectancy of people who are experiencing homelessness, that this, because of the baby boomer higher numbers, that we are not going to likely hit a peak in our senior homelessness unless we have some drastic intervention strategies until probably about the middle of the current decade, so about 2025, 2026. So this is a population we continue to see increase and grow. We do know that 76% of people, and this is not surprising because as you age, your physical conditions tend to continue to grow, but 76% of seniors have a disability. This is where in the previous graph, of course, the general population, 2/3 of people had a mental health condition. However, the senior population is the first area where we see physical health conditions eclipse the mental health conditions, and that 65% of people who are seniors have a physical health condition. Approximately 3 out of 4 persons experiencing homelessness who are seniors are male. The one thing that we really see as a positive thing is seniors who are experiencing homelessness typically tend to have a higher average monthly income. Seniors are going to be just over $1,000 in monthly income, and much of that is due to SSI, SSDI for insurance. And then 50% of seniors who are experiencing homelessness are Black. Slightly lower than our overall population numbers, but it still is a very significant number and a disparity there. Looking at unaccompanied minors, so this is going to be populations of persons who are under the age of 18 who are experiencing homelessness. This is typically a small number of our overall population, but it is a very critical number because unaccompanied minors have some unique challenges that they deal with. So again, from a disparity standpoint, 52% of our unaccompanied minors are Black if they're under the age of 18 experiencing homelessness. And if you look at it with health disparities, 45% of youth have an identified disability, and the majority of those, so this is where in the youth population, the vast majority of them, so 80%, has some form of mental health condition. So the numbers have been increasing over the past several years. 2017, we started at 39. We are now at 45%. And one of the things that we really, and we don't have a benchmark of this in Michigan due to the way that the right questions are asked, but this is a very important element to point out, is that 40% nationally of unaccompanied minors experiencing homelessness identify as being LGBTQ+. So they are LGBTQ. This is one of the primary driving forces due to national resource across the country as to why youth under the age of 18 become homeless. And it is going to need to be something that as we continue to look at solutions to youth homelessness, we continue to take into account the unique needs of our LGBTQ+ community and addressing them in order to address issues of unaccompanied minor or under 18 youth homelessness. Now, the second category of youth homelessness are going to be young adults age 18 to 24. We experienced 3,800 and change of those individuals who experienced homelessness within 2019. One of the first things that jumps out at many of you that will be obvious is that only 24% of them reported having a high school diploma or GED. 43% of them have an identified disability. And then again, among this population, our numbers have come up a little bit. 55% of them are identify as being Black as racial identity. And so youth homelessness within this population, it is also really important to identify that 1/4 to 1/3 of youth experiencing homelessness have had a history within the foster care system. So they may not enter into the homeless system directly out of foster care when they age out of that, but due to being in the foster care system as they were growing up, that is a factor which does affect whether or not they potentially may be homeless down the road. So that is one area that communities continue to look at, is how to target some of those persons coming out of foster care to make sure that we're addressing ways to keep them from becoming homeless because of the unique needs that they have through the system. And here we get to chronic homelessness. So again, the definition of chronic homelessness, for some of you who may not be aware of it, it is a little convoluted, but we will try to keep it as simple as possible. It basically means that you have 4 or more episodes of homelessness within a period of 3 years, or one individual episode of homeless. Basically what happens is either the 4 more episodes of homelessness, or if you have an individual episode of homelessness, the total amount of time that you are homeless has to total up to at least 1 year in length. And then the other part of it is you have to have a significant disability. So 4 more episodes of homelessness in 3 years, with all episodes totaling more than 1 year. And you have to have a significant disability. So as we look at populations of persons who are experiencing chronic homelessness, of course, the numbers for mental health condition jump up to just under 8 out of 10. We have about 78% experiencing some form of mental health condition. About 1 out of every 2, about half of them have a physical disability, and about 1 out of every 3, just over that, experience some form of substance use condition. Again, as we mentioned earlier, as you become more acute, or as your homelessness becomes more significant, in the case of racial disparities, we see that 57% of people who are chronically experiencing homelessness are going to be Black. One thing we do see that is a positive is that the average monthly income of persons who are chronically homeless typically tends to run higher than the statewide average. For others experiencing homelessness, we're just under $1,000 for average income for persons who are chronically homeless. And then 32% of chronic homeless persons have income at program entry. Also worth noting, again, 65% of people who are experiencing chronic homelessness are male, as opposed to other populations where that's a little bit more balanced. And just talking about veterans here and getting into looking at our veteran population, this has actually been an area where we have to give a big hats off to so many of you who are working in the area of veteran homelessness. We know that there are so many providers who are working with GPD, Grant Per Diem, across the state, who are working with supportive services for veteran families, or SSVF. You all, and then again, some communities in Michigan are using Built for Zero structurally around issues of getting to functional zero with veteran homelessness. Hats off to you if you have been doing that. You are definitely making progress in helping us to end veteran homelessness. What we do see with veterans, however, though, is approximately 3 out of 4, or 76% of them, do have a disability, with the 2 most prominent ones are tied at 64%, being mental health condition and physical health disability. 91%, and I don't think this is going to come to a surprise to anyone, and just if you obviously know what the makeup of the military is, but historically, the military has tended to be made up of men a little bit more than women, and so we see veterans who are experiencing homelessness, it tends to be largely more men than women, but that number of women is increasing as we begin to see more women serving in the armed forces. But 91% of those experiencing homelessness are male. And actually, out of all of our subpopulations, veterans have the highest average monthly income out of any homeless subpopulation. They're running about $1,300 a month in income. So families with children are the largest homeless population, the largest subdemographic that we have within the state of Michigan. We have 11 1,661 adults and 15,577 children in 10,548 households in the state of Michigan who are experiencing homelessness. One of the challenges is that homelessness does not look the same for all families with children. So, for example, Black households are 7.7 times more likely to experience homelessness than all other populations. This is significant. And going into the research, we have 44% of Black households are rent burdened, or they have difficulty affording necessities because they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. So if we compare it to, let's say, for example, white households, that's only about 1 out of 4. So that number is significantly more. Also, 59% of homeless families are led by single mothers with a single parent household. Average monthly income for people exiting homelessness is families with children, it is $667. So this is significantly lower than other subpopulations. And just by looking at this number, you can already tell that this is going to be one of the big burdens that families who are experiencing homelessness are going to have to overcome. And again, nearly 4 out of 10 people who are experiencing homelessness, who are part of families with children, are also going to be survivors of domestic violence. Now, one thing of note that is important is this does not reflect directly data that comes from the DV Coalition, but this is based upon the reports of information we have for persons experiencing homelessness that are within the HMIS system.
So we did have a question. It is, has the research looked into just single women without children?
Yes, we have. So those are actually going to be under a different subcategory. Single women without children is going to be under what we call single adults, or HUD's designation for it would be households without children. So that can mean both households with 2 adults potentially in it, or in many cases that a household is going to be just a single adult without any other children under the age of 18 in it. And so those persons would fall into that subcategory.
All right, thank you. That's the only question we have right now.
And speaking of which, here we are, 2 single adults. And so again, homelessness is known to age with individuals beyond their years. So what we do know is that people who are experiencing homelessness tend to age prematurely. They tend to run 10 to 20 years beyond their chronological age. So that, let's just take, for example, if somebody's in their 30s experiencing homelessness, they could be like physically the same as a person within their 40s or 50s. And then we often see within our single adult homeless populations, especially for those who've experienced longer windows of homelessness, that individuals age 50 and over often experience geriatric conditions that we do not see within the house population until those persons are 70 or older. So a couple of the things we see is that people who are single adults who are experiencing homelessness, they typically, about 66% of this, or about 2/3 of them, do have a disability of long duration. And then what we also see, and this is a good sign of this goes back to that health insurance identified issue, but we do have 78% of our single adults who experience homelessness do have some type of coverage with health insurance. This is a little bit lower than, of course, the statewide average, which is 83%. However, this is still, we're in a good performance range because we have over 3 out of 4 people who do have some type of health insurance. One thing, and based on the last question we saw come in, very good question. One thing that we definitely encourage you to do is, I talked earlier about those annual count reports that go out to local communities and local planning bodies. We get into a lot more detail on what is going on within these single adult subpopulations within those reports. And if you particularly have a significant interest because of some of the things you're seeing in the work that you're doing locally, please connect with your local planning body and have them share that report with you, because it will provide you with a wealth of insight on what is happening within your community within the population of single adults who are experiencing homelessness. So one of the big things that is becoming more and more prominent, and you're really going to see this in the coming years ahead with annual reports that we're putting out from the state of Michigan, from a statewide perspective with the state partners. But we really, as much as we've looked at demographics and numbers, we really want to begin transitioning and making a lot more of the work we do in reporting out to be based on outcomes. Because outcomes are really where it's at when it comes to telling the story of whether or not people are not entering homelessness in the first place, but if they are entering homelessness, are we making their episodes of homelessness as rare, as brief, and as non-reoccurring as possible? Because ultimately those are the end goals that we're all working towards to help those in our community who may experience this season of need at some point in their lives. So what we've done is we've determined there are really 4 key measures that we look at. Number one, we want to reduce the new episodes of homelessness that people are experiencing. The second one is reduce the length of time that people are homeless when they do become homeless. The third one is increase the percentage of discharge to stable housing and retention in permanent housing among people who are experiencing homelessness. And then, of course, 4, we want to reduce the rate of returns to homelessness for those who've exited to some form of permanent housing. And so what we really do is take a very strong look at measuring these 4 outcomes and using this data to drive our decision making on resource allocation and service delivery design. And so looking at this, there's a couple things that we're seeing that are definitely promising, that are definitely good. First thing is, if we look at measure 1, which is the number of persons who are first-time homeless and without additional homeless experience within the preceding 24 months. Basically what this means is they were homeless, they had an episode of homelessness, but they did not experience homelessness within the previous 2 years. We are seeing that in 2019, that has decreased. We are going down in that area. We dropped by about 3,200 people, which is definitely a positive sign that we're seeing. Measure 2 is going to be taking a look at the length of time that people who are homeless are going to be in shelters and not on the streets or in unfit places. How long is that episode of homelessness? What it's looking like. So first of all, we started back in 2017, about 92 days with the length of time. It has gone up slightly this year. We were at 55 of this past year to 2019, 55, but we're averaging just over 50 days as the length of time homeless for persons who are experiencing homelessness. One thing just to note about this, there's a couple things. First of all, 2017, some of that was due to measurement issues and how communities were collecting information. But as those communities have become more focused on collecting good information, we're seeing those numbers decrease across the board. Measure 3 is going to be looking at the percentage of clients who exit to stable housing or retain permanent housing. So if we look at this, we notice that our street outreach, that we have dropped by 33%, the number of people who are exiting to some form of permanent housing. One thing I will say, and this is important context on this specific measure, is this measure is largely based on the fact that we've expanded street outreach. And so this may be a more accurate reflection of what is actually happening in the field. Prior to this, except in some of our major urban areas, we did not have the dispersion of street outreach programs as widely as would have been helpful, obviously. And as we've expanded that, those numbers have adjusted accordingly. So this is not something that I would necessarily look at as being as negative as it may seem, because it means that we're actually doing better in addressing street outreach. And then the other two categories, number one, shelter, transitional housing, and rapid rehousing. Those three types of housing, we are running about the same that we did in 2017, 2019, 48%, which, statistically, we'd like to improve that, but that is a performance number that is, I would say, is good. We still need to look for ways to improve that yet, but that is good. Now, one thing that I'm really encouraged by, though, is if you look at the percentage of people who retain permanent housing or exit into some other form of permanent housing from a permanent housing program, our numbers have been running about 96, and then the last 2 years running at 97% across the state of Michigan. That is what I would call to be a retention number, and that you're not going to improve it that much because that is a great outcome. And so really we want to maintain those numbers as being the key thing that we're doing there. Then the final measure we have here is going to be looking at the number of persons who return to homelessness after exiting to some form of permanent housing. If you look at that across the board, we've been declining in the last 3 years. We're down on average between 3 and 5%, which is a very positive sign. So I'm also going to pull in Laurel to talk a little bit about this. So we do want to celebrate some of our successes. We've seen so many things that have been going right in Michigan. And again, we want to applaud so many of you on the front lines and in your local planning bodies and COCs, because you're the ones in the ground that make this happen. So again, we've achieved public safety through cross-sector collaboration. One of the things that's done is it's resulted in a 93% successful parole supervision exit rate for returning citizens. So this is from incarceration for those who participated in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is definitely a positive thing. We're also experiencing declines in youth homelessness, so youth, veteran, and family homelessness, and we really touted on that veteran number because there's so much good work doing, but we don't want to discount youth and family homelessness as well, as providers and you all in the field are doing fabulous jobs on that. And then also Michigan communities, we've had a number of them recognized by USICH as ending veteran homelessness in 2019. And so we want to take our hats off to Wexford County, Missaukee County, Manistee County, the cities of Lansing, East Lansing, and of course those are in Ingham County for their fabulous work on ending veteran homelessness during 2019 and continuing to perform admirably in their work around veteran homelessness. And so, Laura, do you want to talk briefly about some of the work that we've been able to accomplish with legislative action across the state?
Yeah, thank you. And to orient everyone, these items are located on the executive summary of the report. So you can go and use this as kind of a standalone page to summarize a lot of the things that happened in 2019. With legislative victories, 2019 feels like a very long time ago now, but we did have some wins back then. The advocates from the field have been working for years to see an increase in our ESP, our emergency shelter program per diem rate. We have gone from $12 a night up to $18, which is still far from the kind of national best practices that we see and where we're hoping our state will reach. So we continue to advocate for that, but this is definitely a win for us in seeing any increase in revenue and resources for our homeless programs throughout the state. We also were able to create access to free birth certificates. We know that this is a huge barrier for people who are trying to access services and housing when they don't have vital documents like their birth certificate or their state ID. So over the years, we've been able to create a fee waiver, which has reduced some barriers for people trying to access their state ID. And back in 2019, we were able to use that momentum to create access to free birth certificates for people experiencing homelessness. One caveat, those are just for birth certificates held in the state of Michigan, which I know is not an overall comprehensive solution to the problems we face when accessing birth certificates. But again, it is a victory and one that we're happy to celebrate.
And I do want to put a little tangent on this. So I was having a conversation a while back with somebody who I know who's very community involved, very community active, and we were talking about the difficulty that people who are experiencing homelessness have with getting birth certificates and state IDs. And one thing that I continue to stress is just what a burden and what a challenge that is. And that person came to me and just out of the corner of the conversation, well, it's not that hard at all. You just go down to this agency, go to so-and-so agency, talk to this person, and if people are homeless, they can get their IDs, no issue. And what I turned around and said to them is that program that he was referring to is the exact program that so many of you and so many across the state have spent so much time advocating for and building. And when I see something like this, and I saw that information got out that that again there are ways in which this is happening, it encouraged me, because it again points out to the fact that some of this great advocacy work that are happening all the way from the local, regional, state level has actually resulted in policy wins. So talking about some of the challenges, so we still do have challenges in Michigan. And one of the biggest challenges, and this is definitely something that we face, and you all know this in the field, but the average monthly income for a person experiencing homelessness is $662, which is not a living wage to afford rent and living expenses in Michigan. $662 is definitely a challenging number for anybody to live on. And I just don't see that as being a livable wage in any form. So that is one thing that we just know there's still a challenge there, and we need to continue moving forward. Also, more than 40% of the homeless population have long-term mental and physical health conditions. So despite the fact, and again, we celebrate the fact that our health insurance rates are so high in the state of Michigan, it is also important to just continue to recognize that there's a significant chunk of our population with that, and even with the health insurance, they need to make sure that they're following up on health conditions and getting appropriate treatment so that they can continue to live with those conditions they have. And then also, you know, again, the third one, and we've called this one out, and this is going to be a major focus area for us. But despite deepening our understanding of how far racial inequality is within the housing and homeless service delivery system, we just have so much more work to do to transform our services to be more just and equitable. And one thing I will say right off the bat is, in many cases, we don't understand all the whys as to why racial inequity exists so much in our system. And those are going to be questions that we're going to have to answer. And working with all of you in the field, obviously you see this on a daily basis, beginning to understand better what are some of the unique factors that lead to racial inequity in our service delivery system, asking the question of why, and then from why, how do we fix those issues of racial inequity? So there will be a lot of energy being put into addressing areas of racial inequity as we begin moving forward. And I just want to continue to encourage all of you at the local level, at the regional level, to continue to look at that and begin to ask some of those questions yourself so that we can all better understand what are challenges we need to address regarding racial equity. And again, and Laurel, I'm going to let you talk a little bit here about the next webinar we have coming up, but we are going to be talking about using the report in new communications and advocacy webinar on February 8th. And so let me turn it over to you, Laurel, to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing at the next webinar.
Thanks, Jerry. First, want to acknowledge someone has raised the issue that this link is to this webinar's registration. So someone has to tell my children to let me sleep more at night, because I just keep making these errors, folks. So I apologize. We'll make sure the right registration link is sent out with follow-up materials. But yes, on February 8th at a new time, 3 o'clock, we are going to be discussing this report as a tool, as something that you can use in your communities, in your programs, and in your advocacy work to make sure that people are aware of what's happening in our state when it comes to homelessness, that we are talking about some of these concerns around equity and disparities, but also talking about the outcomes that we're seeing and how we can be making smart, data-driven, evidence-based bring those solutions into our state and really start to move the needle even further than what we've all been able to do up to this point. And so we'll be talking specifically about how to use this report in your communications and your advocacy work. I know that at MICA, we use this every year when speaking to our state legislators. We take it to our members of Congress. It is a tool that is invaluable when talking about what homelessness really looks like in the state. But unless you're able to marry this report with your experiences and the stories and the personal touches that you all have with your experience of serving those experiencing homelessness, or in your own experiences of homelessness, that this is just one tool that really does best when coupled with all of your energy and experience with it. So we'll talk about that a little bit and hopefully encourage you all to go out there and talk about homelessness and advocate for solutions over the next year as we kind of process through the 2019 data. So please join us on February 8th from 3 to 4 o'clock. I will make sure you get the correct registration link. Thank you.
Okay, and just want to show again, if you have any interest in contacting any of us at MICA, obviously do not forget, this is one thing that's really important to mention is, for as much as we put on this webinar, and this is our team with myself, Laurel, and Allison, I just also want to put a shout out to so many of our key state partners, because this is really a coalition effort. This is a collaborative effort. Everything we do is done in collaboration. MICA, we are just one part of the picture. We do have fabulous partners at the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, or MISTA, at Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, or MDHHS. Some of our technical support collaborative partners, CSH, Corporation for Supportive Housing, is a big one. The United Ways across the state of Michigan, obviously, are both at a state and local level, are so huge. 211 is such a great resource that we have in the state of Michigan. So, and I know that I am going to be forgetting many state partners. There's a whole range of other state agencies and organizations which are so huge, the work we do. But I do want to stress is just remember that all this work that we do is done in partnership, and really at the ground level, of course, everything that you do at a local level is really where the rubber hits the road in ending homelessness in the state of Michigan. So we do want to thank you. And again, if you have any questions, you can contact any of us, MICA staff. We would be happy to assist you with those. And again, anything that you'd like to know, or any potential data questions about the report that may not have been answered on this, let us know. We'd be happy to see if we can get an answer for you. So with that, just real quick, any other things that we have, MICA team, Laurel or Allison, before we wrap up for the day?
We do. I was just saying we don't have any more questions.
Yeah, and I don't have anything else other than to say thank you, Jerry. You are the man behind the data, and we are very appreciative to have you walk us through this report and talk to us about some of the information behind the data. So I appreciate you. I appreciate everyone on the call who joined us to learn more, and I hope that we'll see everybody on the 8th to talk about how we can actually use this report now. So thanks, everyone.
Have a great afternoon, all.